There's always something oddly trustworthy about someone in a turtleneck. It's the sort of architectural sophistication that they impart on a person. And while I can't quite put my finger on why that is, I am quite sure of why you get that same feeling when someone pulls up in a Volvo. This here is the 2025 Volvo XC60, in this case the plug-in hybrid version. It isn't cheap, but then very few premium plug-in hybrid crossovers are. What's really distinct here, though, is that it just carries itself with a little bit extra that you're not going to get from an X3. I'm Al Alder, and to be honest, I'm a little bit disappointed that this isn't a station wagon. I just tested the V60 Cross Country last week, the successor to the old XC70, and well, a platform twin actually to this here XC60, there's just something special about wagons that we auto journalists and enthusiasts more generally really love. Even though this isn't that beloved straight, low-slung, long roof, this is still a very serious, very responsible, very respectable vehicle. But before we get into why, I do want to address something very important, which is that this here XC60 goes for almost $100,000. That is a lot of money, but it also isn't the one that you're probably going to buy. What's more, all of the XC60s are now hybridized. What does that look like? Well, it's similar to that V60 we just tested. It's the same 2-liter 4-cylinder turbocharged engine that you get in those. That on its own puts out 247 horsepower, 258 pound-feet of torque. Routing through an 8-speed automatic transmission regardless of model, it goes to all 4 wheels in all of these cars. It's the same basic architecture. In the case of those regular hybrids, though, you get a significantly less expensive vehicle from just under $60K. What's more, from that mild hybridization, you do get a really good fuel saving over a straight gasoline. It's nothing crazy, and you don't get any full electric driving in those base hybrids. No, it's just a 0.4 kilowatt hour battery that passively charges and discharges as you drive, accelerate, and brake. Here in the PHEV, though, we're looking at something very different. It's that same mill up front, same transmission, but we're looking at an 18.8 kilowatt hour lithium ion battery that you can charge up at home for up to a claimed 58 kilometers of all electric range. Now, that's all well and good as long as you have the home, the infrastructure, the ability to plug that in, and the willingness to actually stay on top of plugging that in. If you do, onboard here is a 3.7 kilowatt charger. What that means is that it can take that much juice per hour. Now, plugged into a proper charger, you're looking at about 5 to 7 hours to charge this battery fully from zero. Plugged into a regular wall outlet, 120 volts, as long as your home power is up to it, which it should be, you're looking at about 12 hours. So plug it in when you get home from work, it should be ready to go the next day. That's really great if you have errands that are only going to take you about 60 kilometers per day. That would mean that you would burn no gas at all, and that's just dandy. Of course, a lot of people end up driving more than 60 kilometers per day, and that's where the gasoline engine comes in. This gas engine does pretty okay. Here in the PHEV, NRCan rates things at 8.5 liters per 100 kilometers, city, highway, and combined, which is very unusual actually. That's as opposed to the regular hybrid version, which posts about 2 liters more in the city and about 1 and a bit more in the everyday combined driving conditions. Now, these are very difficult numbers to parse and to project because so much of it depends on your driving style, your routes, and your routines. It is still nice to have some sense of what you might look at from a statistical average though. And so NRCan has our backs there because they, assuming you drive about 20,000 kilometers a year, calculate that this here PHEV would cost you about $1,500 less than you'd be paying in fuel in the regular hybrid. That regular hybrid, a figure of about $3,300, this thing $1,800 per year in gas. And that brings us back to that tricky point of price, because starting in those base core trims from $57,000, $58,000, that's pretty okay fuel economy, and you know what? I'd be quite all right with that. Jumping all the way up as you have to get into the plug-in hybrids, and then especially into something like this, which loads all the way up to this $96,000 figure, well, that delta becomes a little bit harder. The break-even is not the reason you buy something like this. Much as in the RAV4 Prime, which takes way too many years to actually pay itself off versus the regular hybrid, you're looking at a similar situation here. Really, it's about your conscience and whether you want to greenwash it by offloading that ecological impact to wherever has to mine the bigger battery for this. With that said, I must grant that the electrified powertrain in here is quite nice. You can choose very easily between regular or one-pedal drive modes here with the drive selector, and running around in the city with that electric juice, it's quiet, it's smooth, it's steady, it complements the optional air suspension that's been added to this unit in particular. It's an EV, and I'd say one that feels more substantial, more of a real car than you may be used to from a lot of full dedicated EVs. But then when you put your foot down, it's still that 2-liter, and it still makes a good bit of clatter. It's not a quiet powertrain, never has been. And that's not a bad thing because you aren't generally driving a vehicle like this like that. Yes, it'll go 455 horsepower in this trim. Along with its 523 pound-feet of torque, that actually makes it more powerful than the V60 Polestar engineered, which I have very much enjoyed and have spun so many tires in. You don't want that power for the acceleration though, no. That power comes in because it keeps the whole powertrain, the whole vehicle, largely undertaxed, so you can just coast it around lazily and comfortably. And that's something that these Volvos do really well, especially thanks to their driving assists. Now, this here does not equip all of the hot new stuff that Chinese parent company Geely has invested in for Volvo, Polestar, and as we've tested now, cars like the Lotus Electra. That means you don't have any LiDAR blisters that are popping open, you don't have any crazy displays here in the middle that are showing you every individual pylon and pedestrian and cyclist out beside you. Still, in regular driving and especially on the highway, there's a lot to appreciate here. Volvo's Pilot Assist suite is, I would say, one of my favorite driver assistant setups. It's very unobtrusive. You don't have a driver monitoring camera in this thing yet. It's not nannying or scolding. What it's doing instead is just doing a really good job of piloting this car about. Thanks to the electric power steering rack that makes this thing so easy to motor out and about in town, it's also able to intervene on steering, both for just really smooth, steady lane keeping that feels like it's looking way farther ahead than you are and that doesn't feel as jerky and reactive as some competitors, but it's also got the ability to intervene when it senses danger. Volvo's whole thing for so long has been about safety. They are the ones, after all, who brought us seatbelts. And nowadays, we've gone well beyond just the regular blind spot indicators. This thing can intervene if it detects that you're about to change lanes into someone. Also on lane changes though, it can also put the foot down and pull you up to speed without hesitating. What's really nice is if you've got the cruise control and you're behind someone slow and you signal into a lane that's clear, it will start to pick up speed to make sure that you merge into that faster lane. Similarly, if someone is crossing into your lane, this will pick them up early and doesn't have to wait until they have entirely crossed over as so many peers do. That means that you aren't racing into where someone's trying to enter and then suddenly being braked back. It's just smooth, it's steady, it's predictable, it's trustworthy. And that's what so much of this comes back to. Well, no, we don't have that same red block reliability that everyone loved in their million-kilometer 240s. We do still have what is ultimately a very comforting place to be. Volvo's SPA, that is Scalable Product Architecture, is a modular setup that they've fitted to many cars since 2017-18. That was the same chassis that I talked about with its stiffness and response in the V60s, and applied here, we've got a lot of those same advancements, particularly in the use of exceptionally high-strength steels, infused with boron and all kinds of other stuff. There's a lot going on in these unibodies, and it's very reassuring that not only do I have all sorts of curtain airbags in the lot, but that in a rollover, Volvos were already stiff, and now they are even stiffer. We've also got all sorts of safety tech just to make sure that you don't run over a pedestrian in the city, and that is all socially responsible and really quite welcome. Visibility is good in here, but it's not as great as what I was enjoying in the V60 wagon. To be sure, you still have great all-around view. The A-pillars here are not so thick that they get in your way, nor are they too steeply pitched. Shoulder check is also good, but you will notice that the belt line in here is higher than what you get in those lower station wagons. That means the windows start higher up. You can raise your seat higher as well to compensate, and yes, it has its advantages for safety. But while it limits your situational awareness a little bit, you do still have the assurance of so many sensors in here, and it's just plainly a lot better than we've seen in a lot of particularly General Motors crossovers. Also worth noting versus the V60 wagons is that you don't get quite the same sort of refinement, or at least you get it in different places. I spoke in that review about NVH, which refers to noise, vibration, and harshness. And on that first point, the V60, and especially that Cross Country, are really lovely, quiet vehicles. They really let you just relax, or if you have that $3,700 magical Bowers and Wilkins system fitted, enjoy every note that comes from that high-frequency clarity. In here, though, we do have a bit more booming. This is a larger space, and you get a bit more of a resonance from the rear end. It's not bad, and it still feels premium, but it's not quite the grace that I so enjoyed there in the V60. Now, on vibration, things are very soft. You're not bothered by anything like that. On harshness, though, these SPA cars have been criticized because that hard, solid frame also means that a lot of that force gets rattled around. Now, it isn't as bad as I think many of my colleagues make out, and if anything, really the bigger crime is the fitment of giant wheels in the interest of style. Both in the V60 and here in the XC60, 18-inch wheels are standard and really are what I believe you should be getting, especially for your winter tires. But in that case, that was on 20s, which look awesome, and this is on 21s. Yes, for sporty driving, that does mean that it's less mushy, less washy, but that's not why you're buying these cars. If you want the professional advice, then don't go for the big fashionable giant wheel. Instead, go for a smaller diameter wheel that leaves more room for more tire. That means there's more sidewall that's able to absorb those impacts so that the harsh shocks don't transmit up into the cabin. It also means that your tires, both in rubber and in fitting, will cost you less money. Now, what about options? There are a whole bunch of ways that you can spec these things. Volvo has a pile of trims, which honestly can get a little intimidating. When you're sorting through those, though, a few of the high-line features that you're gonna see are the Polestar option, which is about $1,600. You get that more aggressive rubber, as well as a sportier setup, but that's not really what you want here. If anything, it just looks cool. For some $2,300 though, you can get air suspension, which is what this thing has. You've still ultimately got your regular shocks and dampers underneath that. That, based on the harshness that you can sometimes experience in these, is something that is worth considering, although if I personally were buying one of these things for the long run, I would forgo that option. The option I wouldn't give up, though, is that $3,700 Bowers and Wilkins audio, because these Volvos just punch so beautifully well on the audio front. Man, oh man, what a pleasure. The standard system, the 10-speaker Harman Kardon, that's fine and dandy, whatever. And to be sure, if $3,700 feels a lot to you, because it's a lot of money, totally understand. But if audio is something that you care about, and especially if you appreciate that cars really are the last place that many people have real hi-fi setups in their lives anymore, this setup is something that's worth, if nothing else, experiencing on a test drive. Because, oh my goodness, the clarity is just beautiful. If you're just someone who listens to really bassy stuff, you may not necessarily appreciate all that this can do, because especially up at the high end, this renders such sharp clarity on sounds like snares and cymbals that's just really hard to find in anything south of $250,000, honestly. We auto journos really love this system, as we have for a number of years now, because it's just that good. These XC60s, along with the V60 and some others, debuted back in 2017. This is not a new vehicle, and it's kept doing its thing. It's iterated a little bit, as in 2023, but it's still been basically the same thing underneath. That is set to change, though, because the 2026 XC60 will be fitting a new infotainment setup with a larger screen, that part I don't love, but with a revised interface that promises to be more intuitive than what we have here. What we have here, I'm not a fan of. It's the same as you get in Polestars these days, and it technically has everything in there, but that also means that it has everything in there. You only get hard buttons for defog and media controls, and everything else has to be accessed in here. If you're someone who's going to plug in to use your wired Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, that means that you're going to have to be switching in and out of that quite often, which is always just kind of a buzzkill. What's more, it's not necessarily an intuitive interface, and it has a couple parallel depth screens that give you sort of the same things but presented in different ways, and it's just clumsy and clunky. A lot of other core options, meanwhile, are buried in a settings menu down here, which then is sorted into headings, but that aren't always necessarily obvious to you, and which then are just broken up into a bunch of same looking lines and text with the same switches at the sides. If you're on the go and trying to find a setting, this makes it really quite distracting. And this is funny because Volvo, being a safety-focused company, does want to minimize your distraction. We see this, for instance, in the digital cluster display, which, unlike others, which have all sorts of different meters and all kinds of things that you can flip through, will just give you trip if you request it, or you can turn on or off a display of Google Maps as projected from that native infotainment. Otherwise, though, this is meant to stay out of your way, and it communicates what it needs to without being bothersome. This, though, this will not be missed. I'm in no way exaggerating when I say that my distaste for this here system is strong enough that if I were in market, I would be seriously considering holding off for 2026. Now, if you are in market, you do need to actually give some serious thought to the V60 models, because for most drivers, that midsize car is really quite plenty. Station wagons aren't just sexy, they are right-sized for a lot of people's use cases. The V60 offers more or less the same kind of stuff that you're going to be able to pick and choose from here, but it does so with just a little bit more refinement in addition to that grace. It's also basically the same price. Both of these cars start from the same $57.58. For Driving.ca, I'm Mel Alder.